It's my pleasure to welcome you to Northern Kentucky History Hour. I'm your host for tonight, Mary Jane Calderon, joining you from my desk at Behringer-Crawford Museum. Also joining me by the powers of Zoom is our guest presenter, Jeannine Kreinbrink, and my assistant, Heather Cook. So thank you, ladies, for being here. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of Behringer-Crawford Museum, Northern Kentucky's history museum, that would not be possible without support. Thank you to all of our sponsors, including the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, the Carol Ann and Ralph V. Hale Jr. Foundation, and our members. If you are not yet a member of the museum, please consider joining for access to discounts and exclusive programming. Learn more and join at bcmuseum.org. We would love to hear from our viewers tonight, so if you have a question or comment to share, please type it in the chat or the Q&A, and I will be sure to get to those at the end of the presentation. Now let's meet tonight's presenter. Jeannine Kreinbrink is the president and senior partner at K&V Cultural Resources Management, LLC, which she co-founded in 2011 with Doug Vonstroh. She has combined a career in cultural resource management with conducting educational and public programs in archaeology, preservation, and history. Her archaeology career began at NKY, volunteering at BCM, where she has been associate archaeologist since 1981. She started a full-time career as an archaeologist in 1986, working on urban archaeology in Covington. Jeannine obtained her master's in 1992 from the University of Cincinnati and has worked as a professional archaeologist ever since. She serves on the board of directors for the Friends of Big Bone. She helped found and served on the board of the James A. Ramage Civil War Museum and also taught as an adjunct professor to the anthropology and history departments at NKU from 1997 to 2014. And she currently serves as a registrar for the Register of Professional Archaeologists. So thank you, Jeannine, so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks. Before we get started, there is a quiz question tonight. The first respondent to enter a correct answer in the chat on Zoom or Facebook Live wins the Northern Kentucky History Hour prize. And most importantly, bragging rights. Tonight's question is, when did the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center open? So go ahead and get those answers in the chat. And Jeannine, if you are ready, then I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Thanks everyone for stopping in to listen tonight. Let me share my screen. Let's go ahead and might as well go ahead and get started. Well, hello. There we go. Yay. So the title of this presentation is also the title of the report that I wrote for the investigation of the Anderson slave pen, and it's called Among Your Friends and Acquaintances, with quotes around it, and you'll see why that is later. And we're going to talk about a building called the Anderson slave pen. Some people call it a slave jail. We'll talk about that too. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the business of slavery in Kentucky. So the business part of it. So I need to thank the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center for permission to share the story of the Anderson slave pen, those people that were enslaved there, and the archaeology of the site. They are the owners of all of the archaeology and information that we conducted back in the early 2000s. And all of the images are courtesy of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. So all the other people there who were part of it or provided information for the project. So about 1999, a gentleman who was the landowner at the time contacted the people who were in charge of a foundation where they were raising money to start the Freedom Center. And this is a map showing where it was located. This is a road called Walton Pike. Route 8 is up there, or Route 9 is up there. This is Route 10. And this is the property as it was in 1999. It had been a lot bigger to begin with, especially over here. And this square right here is the important property square. It's 100 acres. The log building's right there. My down button's not working. There we go. Oh, back. All right. So the little tiny building, can you all see my arrow when I move it? Mary Jane, can you see my arrow? Oh, good. Okay. So this is the building, and the clump of trees behind it is the cemetery. And this is a close-up of the tobacco barn, which is what it looked like when we first got there. The building is actually inside there. So in 1999, a landowner reached out to the fundraising group and said, I have this log building and it has bars on the windows. And I think it must have been a slave jail. And there was a lot of local lore, legends, oral histories about it, and that it was a slave jail. And so some people from this group went out, including a man named Carl Westmoreland. They went out and looked at it, and they're like, wow, you know, this is incredible, because it wasn't really publicly known. And no one in Kentucky had the money to move it, and the landowner didn't want it to stay there. This outer tobacco barn was starting to come apart. You can't see it on this side, but there were holes in the roof, and he was afraid it was just going to fall down. And so the foundation, we'll just call it the foundation group, said, wow, you know, I think we'd like it if we can find a way to move it. And so they signed a contract with the landowner where that foundation group started paying the insurance on the building. We first did archaeology there in January of 2000, and we did excavations like inside. Here, let's see if I can get to the next slide. There we go. Here's a little close-up of the barn. The building's in this part of it, and here you can see the outer barn over here. And it was, the log building was being propped up with these braces inside, and you can see the windows with the bars on them. These are cast iron bars that we'll come back to later. So we did some excavation around the corners of the building, found a lot of interesting information, a lot of early 19th century artifacts, and said, wow, there's a lot of interesting material here, archaeologically as well as architecturally. So the Freedom Center, then people worked for the next couple of years to try to get funding for the Freedom Center itself, and also to be able to move this building. And by early 2002, they received some federal money from the Department of Education with the goal of moving the building and also put it back up, and to help design some of the exhibit work. And for my part, we had three main tasks that we were either responsible for or part of. The first was to complete intensive physical and photo documentation of the log building, to conduct what we call mitigation level archaeology, which is a lot of excavation, and also archival research to provide a detailed picture of the site within historic context of slavery, historic settlement, and the commercial slave trade. Because all the local history said that it was built for a guy who was an infamous slave trader, and his name was John W. Anderson. So these are just some pictures of the scaled drawings that we did. We did all four outside walls and all four inside walls. And this is an inside drawing. And part of that is to show there are peg holes, like see these peg holes on the second floor. This is the second floor. This is the first floor. That we think were interior room dividers. And these are burn scorch marks, probably from candles. And some of these horizontal groups of pegs are probably shelves. Here's another, this is the other wall. There's only one door, this tall, skinny door with this bar across because the original door had a transom window. This window had been taken out and sold to a collector like in the 1960s. Somebody collecting, I guess, slavery stuff. But these other barred windows are all intact. We also did large format black and white photography. I believe the photographer used both like 8x10 negatives and also like 5x7, so different sizes of the large glass negatives, and took a whole series of black and white photos. These are some examples of the photographs, and the Freedom Center has those photos. Some interior shots. So these joists that are now, like some of them are through the windows, these are the original second floor joists. You can see the spots where they were. And later in the 19th century, early 20th century, somebody moved all of these to create different level bars because they use it as a tobacco barn. So they hung tobacco from these, and I don't think we can see the, we'll talk about there were hooks, like rings that were on these bars. And I don't have time to talk about it tonight, but sometime I should do a talk on folklore and oral history and how it all kind of morphs over time, because after these were rearranged for tobacco, the iron rings hung down from the bottoms of the bars. And so local oral history said that they put chains on those, and then that they would chain the enslaved people up to those on the first floor. But what it turns out is that the iron bars went down the center of the second floor. So if the enslaved people were being held on the second floor, they could be chained to those. So they could move around, but they couldn't go anywhere. The oral history around this place is fascinating. This is, there's a color picture of the inside, gives you a good view of how these floor joists have all been moved around out of their slots. And this is after the roof has been taken off. So that's why you can see the sky in that one. This is just a corner. These are half dovetail, or no, steeple notched. These are steeple notched. We'll come back to the architecture. This is a view of the end. You can kind of see how it's out of plumb. It's kind of tilting there. They had to prop it up after they took the outer barn off. Somebody a long time ago had taken out the chimney. This was a 10-foot wide chimney. We'll see the base of it here shortly, and just left the base of it. And this was so they could access it to hang tobacco. And there was no door at the, and then, like I said, this window had been removed. And the floor had all collapsed because at one point they had run cattle and let cows go in here. And so the floor was all collapsed. This is a view after the outer barn is off. There's part of the foundation of the outer barn. You can see the chimney base here. It's 10 foot wide, I think like 8 foot deep. And when they moved it, before they moved it, and I'll show you the excavation pictures here in a little while, we tagged and numbered, I think, the top 2 layers of the chimney rocks and the top 2 or 3 layers of the stones, and the stones that form the foundations now at the Freedom Center are the actual rocks from the site. I mean, as well as the logs, but. Okay, so this is just a view of the building being dismantled. A man named Tom Gaker came in. He was a professional at this, and everything was tagged and numbered, and it was dismantled log by log. And there's a video of this. They set up a time-lapse camera. It took a picture every 5 minutes, and it shows it coming down. And then there's another time lapse of it being put back up in the Freedom Center. It's amazing. So this is it being dismantled log by log after all the documentation. And we couldn't do our archaeology until after the building came down. So this is what it looked like. It looks like a Viking longship, but this is after they took the building off and all the broken floor joists. And then those were all removed. You can see the chimney kind of getting a little more exposed here in the corner piers for that. All right, so here's a map before we move on to the actual excavations beneath and around where the building. So this is the log building foundation itself. This is the outer barn footprint, the dashed line. This is the cemetery where the Anderson family is buried. This drops off down into a stream up here. This is a big field. And we got permission in early 2000 or so, or 2002. These are all shovel tests. So we dig a small hole in the ground and we sift the dirt and look for artifacts. And all the black dots are where we found like 1820s, 30s, and 40s artifacts. So you can see in a really intensive brick scatter here. You see all the black dots. There's another big group of them here. There's some more over here. Another group kind of up here. So our plan when we went back to excavate was to excavate here, but also to excavate here, because the archival research proved that this was John W. Anderson's house. It was called the Mansion House in the deeds, and this was called the jailhouse in the deeds. So we have reference to both buildings, and when they divided the property, as we'll talk later, a division went right through here, because one person got this part, another person got this part. But when we went back to do the excavation, the landowner said, no, you can only, this black line, you can only dig inside this rectangle. You cannot do any more digging out here. And they couldn't convince him otherwise. He was ready to pull the plug on the whole deal. And so instead, we just pretty much completely excavated as much in here as we possibly could to get as much information as we could. And as it turned out, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. You'll see. So that's what we did. So we went back and we completely excavated. Here are the corner piers in purple, chimney. We completely excavated this entire thing all the way around. And the door is right here to the building. It's right there. Here are some pictures of the chimney and just how massive this chimney was in the corner piers. Just amazing. And then you can see where we have been excavating inside. This is a before and after. So this is when we first started digging, and then this is what it looked like after we were exposing the foundations. And then we ended up completely digging out the entire inside as well. Here's another shot of one of these corner piers, so you can see how massive they are. They wanted this building to be sturdy. Some more, we did some trenching with a backhoe, try to expose more ground. I included this one on the bottom. These are groundhogs burrows. So most of the inside and part of the outside was riddled with groundhog burrows. And that cinder block wall that was in the one picture, at one point we probably had 30 groundhog skulls lined up on top of that wall. And we decided that we had evolved groundhogs because at some point they figured out that they could use plastic, like the plastic that you covered hay bales with, as linings for their dens. So half of the dens were lined with this plastic. It was pretty nasty, but very interesting. All right, so start to think about some of the things that we found. This is the doorway. It's a hold on a minute. My little thing is in my way. I can't see. So this is a transom bar, tall, skinny doorway. We found this brass doorknob literally right outside the door. So this unit at the bottom is like right over here. This is an early 19th century style brass doorknob. That's almost as big as it is. And that's started us thinking about, well, when was this building built? You know, John W. Anderson, which we'll find out here in a little bit, was there after 1825. This doorknob's definitely earlier than that. So we started thinking about it and the artifacts, the types of artifacts that we had, and how much pearlware, which is very early 19th century, ceramics, how much early stuff that we had. So that was one clue. And here are some of the artifacts. This is, we have over 6,184 artifacts. These are a lot of the different transfer printed design ceramics that we had, quite a variety of nice ceramics, not ones you would associate with necessarily with enslaved persons. So if we compare all of the ceramics and we look at them based on how many plates, cups, and saucers do we have, and how many early ones. So I have 1828s marked out here and 1840. So we have lots of early stuff, 18 aughts, 18 teens. And then here's this big gap. And then we jump way up after 1840 again. So that gap fits with Anderson. We have pattern matches between the slave pen and where the brick house was. So one of these was found under the slave pen, another one was found where the mansion was. Here's some nice early edge decorated pieces. We have gun flints. This is a trigger from a gun. So lots of more early. So we analyzed all of the flat glass that we found, and all of the flat glass dates to before 1830. So very early flat glass, which, you know, the windows now have bars on them, no glass. So where is the glass coming from? We've got some early hand blown bottles. We have an 1830, I believe 1831 coin. Just some buttons, lots of buttons that we have. All right, so tracing the property history, 1804, a man named Moses Frazee bought 100 acres next to his parents. They lived immediately to the west. He got married a year later and he needed a house. 1825, he was widowed at that point. He sold the 100 acres to John W. Anderson. We'll talk a little bit later about Anderson's family and the business of slavery. He was also involved in horse racing. So this is the break here. So Moses Frazee built this house in 1804, and that fits with the style of the log house, with the doorknob, with the flat glass, with a lot of the early ceramics that we have. We had a log house expert come in, and he did an analysis of the building, and he agreed that he believed it had been built before 1810. So that's kind of where we stand with where it was built. And then 1825, he sells it to John W. Anderson. Come on. There we go. All right. John W. Anderson bought it 1825. He died in 1834. So he only owned this building for 9 years. And at some point in there, he built the brick house. And we believe his parents, his father's name was Worsham, and his mother's name was Miss Anaya Anderson. They were buried in the cemetery as well. We think they lived in the log building, and Anderson probably lived there himself with his wife, Susan, and they had 5 daughters. And then they built the brick mansion, and then his parents both died before 1832. And we think that's when he converted this building into a place of confinement, because these barred windows could not have been installed before 1832, because that's when the business, the Schoenberger business, and there's a mark right there, stamped on the bars. They started their business in 1832. So these windows could not have gone on before that. And we think they were all built at the same time. They're all the same size. They're built exactly the same way. And so then they were installed, and he probably installed a heavier duty door of some sort in the building. I'm not going to read all of these. I told him before, I said, I've got several pages of just all the information that we know about John W. Anderson and his business. So you can kind of read through this. I'm going to summarize it as best as I can. He was involved with what we would call the internal slave trade. So he was buying young people, young men and women, and then he would transport them on flatboats to either Natchez, Mississippi, or all the way to New Orleans. They would be sold at auction, and then he would have that money, and then he would dismantle the flatboats or sell the flatboats and ride a horse back home. That's kind of what we figured. We have a record of him, which I don't have on here. He was a witness in, I think, about 1825 is the earliest we can place him in this business. There was a flatboat on the river, and some enslaved people tried to escape, and he testified at that. Based on all of the records, once or twice a year, he was transporting anywhere between 20 and 30 enslaved people down to Natchez, and at least once to New Orleans. How he funded this is he would get friends and neighbors to loan him money and as an investment, and he would then buy people, and then he was supposed to share his profits. And the title, Among Your Friends and Acquaintances, comes from a letter that he wrote in 1832 to a man named Thomas Marshall, who I believe was a nephew of the Supreme Court Justice. And in there he says, among your friends and acquaintances, I think you'll be able to find enough young men and women. I'm kind of paraphrasing except for the quote. And I will split the profits with you, is what he's saying. So he's enticing Marshall to go out and buy people, and then he will split the profits with him. And luckily for us and all of our research, when Anderson died in 1834, one, he died without a will, and second, he really didn't pay people back. So some of the lawsuits go back 2-3 years or more in terms of affidavits that people filed after his death saying I lent him money, or I bought enslaved people and he sold them and he never paid me back, or he owes me this much money. And so at his death, his family owed all of those debts. And so all these people came forward and filed affidavits. Well, that went into whatever court in Mason County, and that's all now filed down at the Department of Library and Archives in Frankfurt. So I got to hold the actual letter that he had written in 1832 because Marshall submitted it as evidence in the trial. So it's amazing. So here are various court cases. A loan to JWA, that's John W. Anderson, filed after his death. People named Lashbrook. That one goes all the way back to 1830. I call this one a slave deal gone bad. James Kempe, where he claims that he had bought someone, but then Anderson took him and sold him anyway. Anyway, that sort of thing. He did have people escaping, and I've got the actual newspaper article here we'll look at in a minute. This is the, oh, there it is. Anyhow, so all of these things. Here's one where he bought a young woman who died and then he sued Anderson. Here's another escape, a young man named Amos. I think some of these, 1830, 1831, I think some of these people escaping is probably why he decided to invest in getting the bars put on the windows. This is the James Kempe one. I'm not going to try to read it to you, but here it says a lot of Negroes, James Kempe followed him, et cetera, et cetera. So he's claiming he bought somebody, but that he just went on ahead. Here is where he borrowed $12,000 from various people, including one of his neighbors, Frazie's relative. Here's the letter from 1832. The value was $7,640. Here's another business contract. Here's a tax declaration in Natchez, Mississippi for $18,000. It's like over $500,000 in today's money. I had figured all these amounts out, but it was a lot of money. Based on the money that he was making, here's another one, $12,000. He was one of the biggest slave traders in Kentucky. This is more money than the people in Lexington were declaring. So all kinds of interesting. Here he starts buying property. So in the year before he died, he starts buying some land in the neighborhood. Some of it's not contiguous with the 100 acres. Here's some more. Go back. There we go. Borrowed but did not pay back. Borrowed but not paid back before he died. So 1833, beginning of 1834, he borrowed a lot of money, and then he died. There's some great folklore associated with his death. He died and did not leave a will. He supposedly died very suddenly, and given that he owned over 800 acres when he died, and he had this business going, plus he had multiple named racehorses, he had to have died suddenly, or he would have made a will, because he left his family obviously in a bind. So this is a newspaper advertisement he put in. Negro men John and Jim. The important thing, I mean, there's lots of descriptive information. John had on each of his ankles a horse lock and a small trace chain. So he was using horse equipment. A horse lock is like a horse hobble. It's meant to keep the horses from moving their legs too far. He was using those on the people. And then here's, what he says, I'll give $100 piece if they're caught for that one. Okay, so these are some names, and I want to talk to you all about the names because I think it's very important to know a little something about who were these people who were either living on the farm as enslaved people or who were passing through. And we have some information from probate records, and we have some information from his probate. So this is his probate. Anyway, Moses Frazee had, there were one or two enslaved people that, but not all the time. So like 1810, there were none, and none in the taxes until 1820, and then there were 2 young people, but we don't know their names. So John W. Anderson's probate list, before that on the tax records, there would be maybe 8 or 10 enslaved people listed, and we don't get their names because they just say, you know, male, female, what age range that they are. So the men and women who worked on that farm, there were maybe 8 or 10 people. But when he died, there were 30-something people who were still on that farm. So he had been gathering people to take to Natchez, except he died. And so the family had to pay taxes on all those people because he would have got them off the farm before tax time, but he didn't. So we have names because now all of those people are listed in his probate. So we have Simon, and this is who bought them. S.S. Anderson's a relative. Simon, Bob, Fenton, or Bob or Robert, Fenton, Ephraim, William, Washington, John, Phyllis, Melinda and child, Minea and child, Phoebe, Knight and Dimmitt are slave traders. They are known slave traders. Matilda, Maria, Mahala, Joshua, Matt, John Wesley, John Dimity, Matilda, Mary Jane, Mary Ann, Harriet, Ann, Addison, Amanda, Israel, Hannah, George, and America, and Mariah. They're on the sale list, but not the inventory. So they could be one or more of these people that don't have dollar figures. So those are the people that were listed in his inventory, but those aren't the only names that we have. And so I've got a list. So these are the people that we've figured out names for from various sources. Some of these are from the newspaper ads that Anderson put up. So John and Jim that I mentioned already, 1830. Alfred is mentioned. He was the man sold to James Kempe, who apparently then, you know, got taken to Natchez. Harriet was sold to Charles Diamond in New Orleans, 1831. Carter, Emmanuel, Hannah, and Carolyn all escaped in Mississippi. And there was a newspaper advertisement in Natchez advertising their escape. They could have been on the farm and taken all the way down. He may have bought them en route. We don't know that. So then Worsham Anderson's will was probated in 1833, and these are the people who are listed on his probate, some of which stayed on the farm and some were sold. Kitty and Maria, Willis, Harriet, Jefferson, Howard, Dick, George, Gareth, Alice, Rose, Naomi, Lewis, Jack, Dr., Frederick, and Charles. And then Nancy, and then all the ones I already read to you are the ones who were in John Anderson's probate. Not sure why I have a blank page. Hello. Okay, there we go. Yay. All right. Sum up, and I'll sum up the late stuff here. What happens afterward. So he had no will. 2 weeks after his death, there's a newspaper article in the Maysville paper, and it says, if anybody has a complaint against the estate or wants to lay a claim, to please come forward. And the person who was the executor of this estate was his brand new son-in-law, John T. Brooks, who had married their oldest daughter, Elizabeth. And just that same, like right around when he died, they got married, and John was the executor. So he was in charge of gathering all this information and trying to make sense of everything. Elizabeth had 4 sisters, and I'll show you a property division here shortly, but and they all obviously still live there. 1 or 2 of them got married, got widowed, and came back. So after 1834, Susan is living there with all her daughters. There was also one of John W. Anderson's sisters named Prudence. There was another sister who was widowed and came there. So there were, at one point, there were probably 8 or 9 women living there. Most of them adults or almost adults. And John T. Brooks. And but John and Elizabeth built another house on the property up close to the road. So they lived up there. We believe, based on the ceramics and the pattern matches of the artifacts that date to after 1834, that they were probably using the slave pen as a kitchen at that point. Lots of dishes in there. 1844, the daughters fight over the division of the land. And in 1857, it's sold out of the family. Most of the family had left, or well, either they were in the cemetery by then. John T. Brooks and Elizabeth went to, I believe, Missouri. And a couple of them, like one went to Alabama. So they pretty much left. So, all right, so here's the 100 acres. And he had bought this tract, and then he had bought this tract. And then after 1834, and they were all living here in B, which is the mansion house. This is the slave jail. So when the younger daughter turned 18, which was 1844, they filed a claim with the court to get the land divided. So, and because the mom just holds the dower rights, the daughters got the land. And so one daughter got the mansion house, it's listed in the deed, and this piece. Another daughter got this piece, and another daughter got this, tract 4, and there was a barn over here. And John T. Brooks and Elizabeth built a house here, where I'm pointing. So here's the log building, and A, and C is the current house. So that's what happened. And then John and Elizabeth then bought up everybody else's shares. So they kept living there. You know, the rest of the family stayed living there, but they went ahead and bought all of it to put it back into one big property. So I've simplified stuff, but to kind of sum up, the building was built, we're pretty certain, between 1800 and 1810. It was altered later. There's some theory that the roof might have been raised. There's on the chimney end, and I don't have a picture of it in this slideshow, on the chimney end, right above the fireplace, like the second or third log above, so it would have been the beginning of the second floor, is actually stamped J.W. Anderson. So his stamp is in the building. It's like it would have been burned in, like you might put on a barrel if you're marking a barrel of goods or something. It's actually marked. So we're pretty sure that he raised the roof to make it a full 2 stories, and then put in the barred windows after his parents died, and he converted it. The iron mark dates to at least 1832, and the Anderson mark on the second floor. The archaeology, same business. The artifacts are telling us the same thing. The flat glass is telling us the same thing. The artifacts that we definitely have an occupation well before 1825. Domestic use early and then again after the 1830s. So there's very little physical archaeological evidence in the ground for its use as a slave pen, except the gap in the domestic artifacts and the flat glass. So that gap tells us that whatever was going on in that time frame, A, did not involve glass windows, and second, they weren't using fancy ceramics and things like that might get disposed of in the ground. They might have been eating out of wooden bowls or pewter bowls at that time, which are not going to last. Ooh, right on time. So, conclusions. John W. Anderson was a prosperous man, but a risky business partner. He bought the 100 acres. He built his brick mansion, converted the log building into a jail or a pen for enslaved persons. We know the names of at least 45 enslaved persons who spent time on the farm, and it forms a very powerful statement on slavery and the internal slave trade, which I don't have a lot of time to go into a lot of details, but by the 1820s and 30s, importation of Africans had been prohibited in 1808. And so inside the United States, then slaves were allowed more, like having more children, you know, whether that was with African-American partners or, you know, being fathered by the slave owners, they're producing more children. And in the upland South where we are, you don't need enslaved people every day. You don't need 100 people working on your farm because if you're raising corn and tobacco, you know, you do a lot of planting and then you do a lot of harvesting. And so you don't necessarily, can't sustain that many people. And so his letter laid out the entire premise of it. People between 18 and 24, buy them at a reasonable price, take them south and sell them. And that's what he did. He never advertised because he didn't have to. That's where the among your friends and acquaintances come from, because he would just go to his neighbors, say, how, you know, you got any teenagers ready, you know, for me to take to Natchez? And that's what he did. Now, there was a public face in Kentucky to slavery where if you look at advertisements for courthouse days, pre-Civil War, a lot of times there were auctions at the county courthouses, like if somebody, like these estate sales, where someone would go and buy enslaved people. So there's kind of a public face, and those people like Knight and Dimmitt, they did advertise, but Anderson never did because he didn't have to. But he was a risky business partner because he didn't like to pay people back. So it's just an amazing story. There's so much on the folklore. This man only owned this property for 9 years. And yet in Mason County legends and oral history, it's infamous. And it's really fascinating. Oops. So thank you all very much. I'm happy to answer questions. The answer is 2004, by the way, September 2004. Go visit if you've never been there. It's amazing when you can stand inside this building and feel the whole setting and the exhibits. Some of the artifacts are on display that we excavated. More research is ongoing, and exhibits are either have been or going to be updated. So it's an amazing place.
Thank you so much, Jeannine. I want to repeat that question was, when did the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center open? And that was 2004. And so congratulations to Dave, who was our winner. Your prize will be sent out to you. We do have some questions. Heather, you want to go ahead and start those?
Yeah, so our first question was, How old was Anderson when he died?
About 42 or so.
And then we
give or
just
take.
and then we just had one more question that was how many people could be kept in a log house at a time?
Well, several of his trips, because we have his tax, because in Natchez he had to pay taxes on what he had earned. Several trips, there were at least 25 people. And the inventory after he died was like 32 people, and there were generally like say 8 people, so that would have been in the 20s, at least 20 people that would not normally have been there. So at least 20 or more by the time he had gathered everybody up.
Yeah. And someone just asked what part of the country was the pen found?
That's Mason County. So south of there's Maysville, southwest. So if you're driving on the AA highway and you come to the top of the hill and it says welcome to Mason County, first road to the right is Walton Pike. And then it's 2 miles down to Route 10. So that's where it was. Route 10 runs between like, I think, what's the county seat of Bracken County? Anyway, it runs from that through Germantown over to Old Washington, which was the original county seat for Mason County. And it's right on Route 10. So
I have a question. So what was the most like fascinating thing that you would say that you found doing this research?
I think to me was the fact that he took a domestic residence his parents had lived and his children had probably lived, and he converted that into a prison for enslaved people. To me, that was the most powerful, because when we first went out there, you know, and the local people said, oh, he built this slave jail, but he didn't build it. I mean, that would have been bad enough. But the fact that he took his own domestic residence and turned it into a jail for enslaved people, to me, that was just astonishing. Just, you know, you think about, you know, what people are capable of, and that's what he did. And how everything worked together to tell the story. The archaeological evidence backed up the archival research, and then we were able to either prove or debunk, you know, some of the oral history stuff because of all that research.
So earlier when you showed the map, I think you said he didn't want digging on the rest of the property. So somebody asked him,
Yeah.
why do you think that he didn't want the digging on that part?
What he claimed was it was because it was an alfalfa field. So it was an alfalfa field, and alfalfa is a pretty high priced hay crop. And he, you know, I don't know, it was special to him, I guess. But he let us dig our little shovel tests all over it. But then when it came time to actually say, bring out a backhoe and to bring out the big trucks and everything to get the building, he backed off. And I don't know if he was afraid that, you know, if the rest of it turned out to be significant, they'd tell him he couldn't do something. But he got a little ornery at the end, so it was kind of hard to get a reasonable explanation, except no. And then every day we were out there, he would come out and say, are you done yet? And even the big trucks to haul the logs off were confined inside that rectangle. So it was kind of crazy at the end. But now now there are different landowners. So there's a tiny little chance we might get. Well,
someone did ask. They said, what was the status of the project? So I'm wondering if you think there is more to come from that site.
I hope there's a tiny little chance. But it's totally different landowner now, and they are very welcoming. I took the Freedom Center people out and we visited earlier this year. Keep your fingers crossed.
Carol also said, how did you find artifacts on the entire property? I guess because she said if you weren't allowed to dig outside the walls of the pen.
We did to begin with, so I don't know why my up button's not working. We go back. It's not going very fast here. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to the map. Keep going. There's the artifacts. So we're getting close. All right, you can see the backhoe trenching that we did. That was inside the big rectangle. There, one more. There we go. Okay, all these little dots. So early in 2002, he let us dig all these little holes. So they're about that big around, and they, that deep. And we sift all the dirt. He let us do that. But then when we wanted to come out and bring out a backhoe and strip off the plow zone, and that's where he eventually said no.
Okay.
That you can't do that, because we really wanted to dig over here. And over here, and out here, because the enslaved people who lived and worked on that farm all the time probably lived over here or over here. There were probably other houses for the enslaved people to live in, at least a couple of them. So, because if his family was living here, then the enslaved people were not living there. So that's what we're thinking, is that there have to be other slave quarters somewhere else.
We also had someone ask if there were any enslaved people buried in the Anderson Cemetery.
Probably. I don't know. I didn't bring pictures. Anderson and his wife are in there. At least half of his daughters are in there. His parents are in there. But there are also graves marked by just limestone sticking up out of the ground. They could very well be enslaved people. So I would say probably yes. We don't have any record of it, but probably yes. Ooh, timing is perfect.
Yeah, very excellent timing, Jeannine, and
Yep.
amazing presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I do encourage everyone to check out the Underground Freedom Center.
Yep.
To see more photos and more of this. The slave pen is there, correct?
Oh, it's a centerpiece in the main level when you go in. You can see it from outside if you're like standing over on 3rd Street and you look at the big glass windows. It's right inside. They essentially built it around it. So when they put it back up inside, the building was still under construction. And then it went back up log by log, just the way it came down. And like I said, we actually tagged and labeled like the top 2 levels of all the foundation rocks. So,
for more Northern Kentucky history throughout the week, check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, where you can find the latest Curators Chat, along with all of our past Northern Kentucky History Hour presentations. Please like and subscribe. That's all we have time for this evening. Thank you again to all of our sponsors and supporters of BCM. Until next time, take care, everyone, and good night.